guys, and welcome back to Marie's Memoirs, my VIP meet and greet. Today I have with me Emma, and Emma specializes as a special educational needs and disabilities consultant. Welcome to Marie's Memoirs, Emma. How are you feeling today?
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Any opportunity for me to talk about my passion. So thank you for inviting me onto your lovely show. Definitely.
Amazing. So today, oh no, I'm genuinely excited to have you here because I'm so ready to learn. Oh my goodness. Okay, so today's topic is going to be autism and just basically understanding autism and just creating that awareness for it. So I'm wondering if you could help us out with what autism is and what can possibly trigger or cause autism.
Okay, definitely. So if I tell you a little bit of my background, so you know why I'm explaining all of this and sharing all of this with you as well, that might be really helpful for people listening in, thinking, who's this woman talking about autism? What does she know?
Right.
So I am a SEND consultant. I work with schools and I work with families, and my specialism is autism. I've worked in this field for over 20 years. I'm a teacher by trade. And I'm a psychologist as well. So that's where I did my first degree, and a lot of my training is in psychology. And so it kind of was, yay, where the two of them met. So my teaching, love being in the classroom, love being with children. But in my mind, there is, why are children having barriers to learning? Mm-hmm. That shouldn't be a thing. Okay, so that's when my psychology came in, and I'm like, okay, I've got children in my classroom who have barriers to learning. How can I support them, and how can I move them on? And that's where my passion for all things special educational needs came from, but specifically my passion for autism came in when I started to run autism specific settings and help people to understand, and other colleagues in the teaching profession to understand what children on the spectrum need to be their best possible learning self, because in the classroom that's what we're focused on, but as we all know, to be our best learning self, we have to be our best self. So we have to understand ourselves and understand the children that we're involved with. So that's kind of like a whistle stop tour of how I got to this point of understanding autism. And so what is autism? Autism is a neurological difference. The brain is made up slightly differently. It means that that person sees the world slightly differently and interacts with the world slightly differently. So when we look at the categorizations in the medical journals, the DSM-5, it's looking at social communication, it's looking at interaction, it's also included the sensory profile now about how our senses communicate with the world. So we've all got a sense of senses, our hearing, our sight, our touch, and we've all got an individual way that they may be interacting with the world. But when they're very distinct and they're very different, they can have a very distinct impact on that individual's perception of the world and themselves in it. And so autism has become a bit of an umbrella term where it's taken in things about communication, interaction, relationships, sensory, emotion, anxiety. There's so many elements that come together when we talk about an individual being autistic. But if we think about it in just the way that the brain is just slightly wired differently, and so all of these things I've just discussed are perceived differently by the individual. So yes.
Okay, so I heard you mention that's quite a unique way to think about it. I didn't know it was literally seeing the world just from a different kind of like a different lens. Just seeing it a little bit differently to how the majority of everybody else understands and the world around them. You mentioned the word spectrum. Is this, now I've heard this word mentioned before in regards to everybody is on the autism spectrum. Is that true, or does it?
I challenge that.
Yeah.
I challenge that a little. Okay. And the reason why I challenge it, I think we're all, I have a great friend called Tim Goldstein. If you're interested in autism in terms of from a lived experience, definitely look him up. It's absolutely amazing. And he describes something called the neuro cloud, that all of us are kind of in this neuro cloud, and all of our brain types and approaches are in this neuro cloud. And then you've just got different groups within this neuro cloud. So the neuro means brain and how our brains all work. And then you've got just people who are just distinct in that group. They're neuro distinct, their brain is different, it is distinct. So when we're thinking about all of us being on the spectrum, I definitely argue against that. What I would say is that some of the outside presentations of somebody on the spectrum, we all experience. So if I'm slightly more stressed, I love a list and I love to be in control, because actually it gives me a little bit of, okay, I know what I'm doing now. So if I'm in a stress place, you will find a list somewhere, right? And that's because it's made my world slightly more predictable, and it's helped me to work out that where I am in that moment of stress. For me, that stress moment will probably pass quite quickly. It may, depending on the season and the reason, it might pass quite quickly. For somebody on the spectrum, that idea of stress and feeling stress can be with them daily, which is why that need to control the environment, that need to be more predictable, that need to understand what's going on is heightened in somebody on the spectrum, because their bodies are responding to the different stresses that they're experiencing because of their neurodistinction. And so we're all going to present the same behaviors. We're all going to show the same behaviors at some point for some reason. But when somebody's on the spectrum and are autistic, it's prevalent in their life. It happens consistently. It happens more often. It's something that's not well within their control all of the time. And so I would definitely argue that not all of us are on the spectrum at all.
That's very interesting of you to say. In regards to, because what just popped into my head was anxiety. You know, when people are experiencing high anxiety often, is that a direct link to autism or not so much?
Different routes for different reasons. So people on the spectrum can and do describe having high levels of anxiety for a range of reasons, definitely. But anxiety itself is something that we can all experience, again, at varying degrees, for varying reasons, at varying times in our lives. And so anxiety itself is not should we say, it's kind of a byproduct of the fact that the autistic mind has to kind of work out this neurotypical world a lot more, which then leads to more anxiety. So if we was to put that into the concept and the idea of interaction, neurotypically, we've all had those moments where we kind of feel either shy or we're a bit reserved about going into a particular space, and it kind of makes us slightly more heightened. And a neurotypical person is someone who isn't seen as neurodistinct. And so we have those experiences. Go ahead. I can see a question. Go.
What's a neurotypical person?
So a neurotypical is somebody who hasn't got a diagnosis of autism or dyslexia or ADHD. So that's where the continuum goes. And so, but as neurotypicals, I would call myself a neurotypical. I've had many experiences where I feel like, oh, I'm going into that space. I feel a little bit self-conscious, etc. But I find within me the skills, the past experiences to kind of get past that situation. For some people on the spectrum, for some, not all, for some people on the spectrum, that interaction is difficult every single time.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if they've been there before, it doesn't matter if they've met those people before. That sense of interaction, that sense of going into that room, that sense of having to engage in conversation and all of those things can actually be anxiety inducing for them,
Right.
based upon either a prior experience or because of their conscious understanding that that's not really their natural way of being in that space. And so anxiety itself isn't autistic,
Right.
but autism can kind of lead to some anxieties, definitely.
Okay. Okay, understood. And so, are there different types of autism then?
There is definitely different classifications.
Okay.
The old medical system and classifications for autism had a range of Asperger's, which there's a bit of controversy around the way that this is described, saying more higher functioning, but
Right.
it's not a label that you should be feeding into. And then going into more atypical autism and then into classical autism. That's kind of how autism has historically been looked at, and everything in between those categories. Now the DSM now categorizes it as level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 being, oh gosh, again, I'm not loving the terminology around this, but being more of an independent type, managing your world yourself, feeling more engaged in your world, able to engage in schooling and employment and relationships and all those other things. And as you move into the level 2, level 3, you're looking at people who need a little bit more care, a little bit more support, aren't going to become so independent in life, may have restrictions on language, may have restrictions on even being verbal, those kind of things. So it's where that spectrum comes in. It's about how verbal is an individual. Are they able to hold a conversation, but actually on the other side of that may not even have acquired speech. So there's quite a spectrum of young people, adults, that can end up on the spectrum of autism. But now it's categorized as level 1, level 2, and level 3.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying that. That's very interesting.
There's a lot of info.
It,
Yeah.
it is. But
There's
it's
a lot. There's a lot.
you mentioned the DSM. Who are the DSM?
So the DSM-5, so that's where things like anxiety, autism, ADHD are categorized, and that's for the medical profession use this to support their diagnostics around people that they're working with, if they are autistic or not, etc. So it's kind of, it's the big organizations where they're pulling all the information, and they look at past history, and they look at research, and they put it together and say these group of people have this set of characteristics, and that comes underneath the umbrella of autism, or that comes underneath the umbrella of ADHD. So that's how things are categorized and are diagnosed.
Okay. Okay. Do you know what the DSM stands for?
Oh, the diagnostic something medical. I can't remember the S. Diagnostic. I'd have to look that up. Yeah, DSM-5. But if you just put it in DSM and the 5 as in Roman numbers, it will come up for you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's really good to know, to be fair. Okay, so in regards to autism within the UK, are there any kind of statistics on individuals within the UK that have autism?
So the up-to-date statistics, we just had a quick brief look again, is 1.1% of the population. Okay. I would have to do my numbers on that, most definitely. But they are saying at the moment that 1 in every 54 children are most likely to have autism as well in the UK. And so you're looking at a year group of 60 children, there's possibly 2. I'm going to tell you that there's definitely more. And so that 1.1% is actually recognized cases, but I would definitely bet if we were to do a very quick screening of the whole population, that number would jump quite dramatically. and
Wow.
especially the school, and especially the child numbers as well. Definitely. Yeah, because what you have to understand in terms of the diagnostics, they have a set approach to that, and the benchmarks move sometimes. But what in my work, I get families definitely coming to me and saying, they've managed up to now, but we've always seen something, we've always questioned this, da 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 da, and then I would do a screening. I do the work and the screening that I do, and it would come up that they most likely are on the spectrum as well. And so I'm sorry if you can hear my little voices coming in saying hi, mummy. Sorry. So yeah. So I would say that the screening side of it, if we was to screen the population, that number would go up very drastically. I say, definitely. I think there's more people on the spectrum than we think.
Right. Right. That haven't actually took the test and been diagnosed just yet.
No, and I'm managing life, and I'm at the independent side, but they might be finding that actually they've never really felt connected to others, or they find it really difficult to hold a job down, or stuff like that might start to highlight for adults. So I found that I work predominantly with families and children.
Yeah.
But through this time, adults have come up to me, and I've worked with them, and they're like, Emma, I've always thought this. I've done a bit of reading, and I'm thinking this. And when I do go through the formal screening and the formal work that I do, it works out that they probably are neurodistinct and probably do have autism or ADHD. And so it's then their journey of understanding that for themselves. And I don't know if you've been on Clubhouse and if I'm even allowed to mention it on here, but Clubhouse is like a new app, and I've just found a whole community of people on Clubhouse who are adults, who are questioning and saying, I believe I have autism, I believe I've got ADHD. So yeah, it's quite prominent, I think.
No, that's you're giving me so much knowledge right now. Like, I'm just like, where's my pen and paper? Like, literally. So okay. It's quite interesting that you've said like quite a few adults are starting to kind of like realize and notice a few things and just ask more questions about it. It brought something to mind. The other day, last year actually, one of my friends mentioned it to me actually, and I did like two because I'm very specific about specific things, and things have to be in a particular way and order for me to be okay with it. I've just got a different way of doing things, but unless you are aware of certain things, you wouldn't put a name on it. But if somebody completes like an online form that takes like 15 minutes online, how trustworthy are those? Because I'm just trying to understand, like, if somebody listening decides, oh my goodness, some of the things that you're mentioning, let me go in before I go to like get a formal examination. How trustworthy do you think these online ones are? Are they accurate, or would you just say, go to the correct places to check it out if it's actually an issue?
Yeah. I wouldn't like to be a generalist on this, because there are some good ones. There actually are some real good ones, and anybody listening to me can actually reach out. I have got a few that I would say, oh, those questions were spot on, and I can kind of see where they were going with that. But don't just pick up anything and run with it. Google is an interesting place. And so, so I would say definitely be mindful around which ones you go for, but definitely investigate. And I think what I find is that families, adults who probably have children now who probably might be on the spectrum are starting to question themselves and thinking, well, I used to really do that, and I still do this, and I think I do this now, and all of this kind of stuff. And so that's where it can start to heighten for a lot of adults when they have their own little people, and their own little people are showing them little behaviors or differences. And so that's something that I've seen has been definitely a big trend. I think young people now as well, college age, university age, are very reflective about themselves, and they're saying, you know, I can do this, but something's stopping me, and I need to understand what this means. And they're going out for that research and they're looking into stuff, which is absolutely amazing. And what I'd say, yes, do start on the internet. There's a wealth of information up there, but find somebody who has worked in the field, connect with somebody who can guide you in the right directions with the right resources, maybe connect you to the right person, all of those kind of things. Because I think it becomes a worrying world when you start to go into the internet and everybody's sharing their view of it. And the thing that I always do with families is, I know you've read 100 books and I know you've read 100 blogs, but I'm here to tell you that you have your own unique experience of this. And so you now have to sit down now and think, what specifically is happening for me and my family? Because if we only go textbook, we can worry about so many things that you may never experience with your child, your experience, your journey. And so you have to kind of go textbook and then go, okay, but what does this mean for me? And I think that's the really key part of any journey we all have, but that's definitely a key part when we have a diagnosis, because a diagnosis will just say, here you are, here's the term, go and look this stuff up. And in my experience and my experience with families start to read everything and anything and then start to get really concerned that this is going to be their experience going forward. And I always say, find a professional that's working in the field, that has worked with the field, that you can trust and connect with, that can help you to kind of work your way through that. So that was the really long answer. So the short answer is, don't rely overly on Google.
Yes, ma'am. No, thank you for that, because I think like, a lot of the time when we want to learn, we literally, the quickest thing for us to do, people don't necessarily, your first thing is not to go to the library. You don't drive or walk to the library. You go online and you search whatever pops up. You're going to read it. You'll go back onto the search. You'll scroll. So it's just, again, it's just making sure that you're going onto reputable sites, and that you're not taking all the information in at once, because it might not be applicable to your situation. So thank you for clarifying that and shedding some light on that as well. No, that's really good. This is so informative. I'm genuinely just load. I feel like I'm just loading up in my knowledge. I'm like, okay, I got that.
I'm glad I could help.
So in regards to signs of autism, are there any kind of telltale signs of someone who is autistic in regards to like a child or an adult?
That's a really good question, but it's a very wide question.
Right.
I think if I was to start from very early on with children and babies, so diagnostics don't really come into play. People don't really overly question until the child's coming into their 1 or 2 year old, because and usually for families the trigger is speech. If the child's speech is delayed, that's usually what families start to go, okay, I kind of thought some things before, but actually with the speech element of it, that's making me really question something as well. But that's not always the first sign. And so there can be a number of signs. So if we think about the categories, communication, interaction, how has that little child been interacting? And then that continues as people grow older. The interaction looks different. Maybe the interaction isn't as clear cut, and you kind of looked questioning, wondering, okay, not sure what that interaction meant and things like that. And then communication from the point of somebody who, as I said before, is fully verbal, can speak in, understanding, all is fine. And then it moves up the spectrum where actually fully speaking, but actually there may be some missing understanding. That's not receptive, not quite getting all the gist of language, not getting all of the nuances. And that can move all the way up to actually limiting understanding, limited understanding, and limited speech. And so you've, as I said, you've got this spectrum where communication and interaction lies, where actually you aren't always going to be able to tell, because some people, as I said, speech is fine, reception is fine. However, those small nuances where you think, oh, I wonder if they really understood that or not, and things like that could be part of that. And then there's other signs. You know, one of the main classic signs people look for is eye contact, which is not always the best indicator. So individuals on the spectrum have historically been put down as not sharing eye contact.
Oh wow.
And a small story about that. So as I said, it's not the best indicator, but it's an indicator that's always been highlighted in the diagnostics.
Right.
And so I'll tell you a story about that. So there's a young boy that I was starting to work with, and we were no eye contact there at all, none at all with myself. But he had eye contact with mum, which was good, great. And myself and mum were speaking, and I said, you know, I realised that he doesn't share eye contact this time. Obviously, I understood the context, I understood why. I'm a complete advocate. We don't tell young children to look us in the eye. Don't do that to anybody, okay? Because there's a process that's going on when people aren't looking at you, that is interrupted when somebody is looking at you. So never demand that somebody looks you in the eye when you're trying to discuss something with them. But that's just by and by. So I'll go back to the story. And the mom said her son described eye contact as painful. He said for him, eye contact was painful. Now, this is an individual, and this is an individual on the spectrum. This might not be the same for every child, every young person, or every person on the spectrum. And what that really highlighted for me is what I think he was saying, and I have no right to interpret his words because it was painful for him. But what I think he was saying is that is so uncomfortable to look somebody in the eye.
Right.
Because if we think socially, when we look people in the eye, it is an intimate thing. And if you are not the type of person that intimately connects with others, it's actually quite a off-putting emotion. It's actually quite an emotional experience. And that's what that young child explained to his mom. As I said, I never encourage children to look me in the eye. However, what we worked out is that once he understood you, once he connected with you, he could look you in the eye, because by the time we finished working with each other, we had good eye contact in our communication, and we were sharing eye contact. But for him, that not knowing me meant that was not something he could do with me as an individual. Wow. And so so that's something that, you know, you will find that some people on the spectrum don't look people in the eye, and that is something that is a sign, say. But again, I'm not a stickler for that, because many people do it, and I do that actually when I'm overly emotional. So if I'm having an overly emotional conversation with someone, I'm very rare to look them in the eye at the time. And so it's really interesting, isn't it? As I said, going back to that first point, we all have very similar emotions and behaviors, but at different reasons, at different intensities. And so communication and interaction is definitely something to look for as a sign, let's say, as autism. How a child plays as well. So there's lots of research around children that are on the spectrum not naturally knowing how to role play. Again, not for all children, but that is kind of one of the general statements that is made for children on the spectrum, that they don't naturally role play. They play, and they real life play. So they'll role play everything they've experienced and seen, but they may not necessarily enter an imaginative world and create imaginative play. Okay, and so that's another thing, and these are connected to some of the theories on psychologies around autism. So there's three main psychologies around autism. One is called the executive functioning theory, which is about how basically we've all got a mini secretary in our brain that helps us to keep organized. It helps our working memory, it keeps us knowing where we've put things, where we're going to go next, and all of these things. And this can be impacted for people on the spectrum. So they might find that they can't organize themselves. They're not necessarily going to remember the PE kit, remember the call coming up, or and those kind of things, and find that planning events or planning experiences are quite difficult for them because of that executive functioning. The other one is theory of mind. So theory of mind is I believe certain things about something, and if my theory of mind is not fully developed, I believe you believe exactly what I believe. Okay, so I don't understand that you might believe something slightly different to me. Okay, so that's where theory of mind comes in. And that's where that when we sometimes you might hear that somebody on the spectrum is quite rigid in their thought thinking, they don't deviate, they're not able to take on the point of view of others, that kind of thing. They lack empathy. That's not the truth, by the way. They definitely do not lack empathy, but it's because of this understanding that this is how I feel. I have no other experience outside of that, and don't know how you feel. And so that's theory of mind. And then the other one is central coherence. And central coherence is basically seeing things in its parts and not as a whole. So in this room, I walk in, I see the whole room. For some people on the spectrum, they come in, they see the parts, they might see the cushion and the mirror, then the curtains, and then the colour on the wall, and then they pull it into the whole. And that's for some, again, not for all. This can impact learning, impact the way that they see the world around them, impact their emotion, all of these kind of things. So these are some of the main theories and psychological theories around autism. That can kind of impact the way we play and the way we communicate, the way we plan, the way we interact, all of those kind of things. So yes, there's lots to think about, but every individual on the spectrum presents and shares their autism very differently.
Understood. Wow. So if I was to meet someone that I know has autism, or if I make a new friend or colleague that I'm aware that they have autism, how best can I support them, and in regards to just understanding how to, or is it different with everybody? Is there a best way or best practice to be supportive?
You are right. It's different for everybody. And just like we would approach any new person that we meet, we approach that person exactly the same way, openly, willingly, with human kindness.
Yeah.
And as that relationship develops, like all relationships, we start to recognize, well, actually, if I keep talking at this speed, that's actually really difficult for that person. And they've either said that to me or I've observed that maybe I should kind of just change a little bit about how quickly I speak, because then actually I know that helps that person to understand me a bit. Okay. And so it's that kind of thing. It's not going in with a preconceived notion, because I think that's kind of when that unnatural relationship starts to develop, because we've got preconceived element of conception of the person, and we really want to be able to connect with the humanness of each one of us. And so I'm all about, let's approach each other as is, recognize difference. So if you meet that person and actually they're slightly abrupt, because that's one of the things that can be very, very prominent on the spectrum. I had to get the thickest skin working with the children that I did, because if I cut my hair and they didn't like it, they would tell me in the morning, Miss, why did you do that? That doesn't look great. I'm like, okay, thanks. And so, that kind of bluntness, that clout, just being really clear can be something that's very, very, very evident on the spectrum. And so sometimes we have to kind of go, okay, that wasn't about me. That was a communication style. That was that individual communicating with me in their own way. So yes, they were slightly blunt about my new perfume. Okay, guess they didn't like it. but it's how I guess it's how, you know, how you then choose to take that on, and how you then colour your relationship with that person after that situation. And it's little nuances like that which we all, you know, have to kind of meet each other halfway. I don't think it's about, you know, neurotypicals have to start making this space for people with autism, but yes, that's very true, and it does have to happen, but actually there's this dance that has to happen. We have to work each other out as individuals, and really work around that, because as I said, if I didn't have the thick skin that I did, I don't think I could have continued doing my job, because I'd heard all sorts over the years, all sorts.
Oh man, that's that's very important, to be fair. And I think one thing that stuck with me with what you just said was literally just meeting everybody where they are, just literally human kindness, start there and it will progress. And then, like you said, it's that dance of kind of like just learning to understand, you're learning patience, you're learning what works, what doesn't work, and then you progress like that. So now that was really cool.
Yeah, we do that with each other, don't we?
Yeah,
All the time.
exactly.
And sometimes what the difference is that two, let's call them neurotypicals, not always, but two neurotypicals kind of see, oh, okay, me making that joke didn't work, I'll pull back a little bit and I won't do that in the same way. Some people on the spectrum may not have grasped that it didn't work, may not have grasped their impact on you or their impact on the room, and so their approach will be exactly the same the next time you meet them. And so it's about understanding that that dance is a bit longer, but actually we do that dance with each other all the time, and we work out each other all the time, and that's all that's necessary both ways. On when we're working with anybody on the spectrum, anybody who's different to us, you know, and we can put any difference in that box, can't we? We have to work out, how does this person communicate, how does that person interact, you know, male to female, black to white, you know, it just doesn't really matter. We have to find that space where we understand each other, and I think that's exactly what we need to do in the neurodiversity space.
Amazing. I really appreciate you today. I've learned so much in regards to autism and just understanding it a little bit more. If anybody was if anyone wants to delve into a little bit more information, do you have any specific websites, maybe for the UK or globally, that people can look to just to kind of like learn more for themselves independently? And also, what are your social media tags if people would like to get in contact with you, Emma?
Yeah, I think in the UK, one of the best places to go is the National Autism Society. They're amazing. They have got so many resources, so many learning bits. You know, definitely go there. I'm obviously going to plug my own stuff, so come over to the Essential. Come over to the Essential Education group as well. You know, I'm on Instagram, I'm on all the platforms. You know, where we share lots of knowledge. We have online training platform for teachers. We have online training programs for individuals that just want to understand more about autism. So definitely look up the Essential Education group as well, and find me on all the platforms, either underneath the Essential Education group or underneath Emma Pinnock, essentially on Instagram. And so I think it's one of those spaces where if we truly lead with our humanness and we lead with understanding that difference is actually the norm, which is the one thing that I say all of the time, is that difference is the norm. So if we can engage in with people knowing there's going to be some difference or another between us, then actually the difference will become less of a shock, less of a thing we have to manage, and less of a thing we have to have this conversation about. So difference is the norm. Engage in each other's differences. As I always say, uniquely take your place in the world and let other people take their unique place in the world. And I think that's the key thing that we have to do. So yes, definitely.
I absolutely love everything you have just said. It resonates so much, especially in regards to celebrating difference and knowing there will be difference and just embracing that, because as humans, we are all different, and that's okay. That is our strength. And so that really that literally warms my heart. I'm not gonna lie, I'm sitting here like, oh. No, I've genuinely, I've had such an amazing time. I've had such an amazing time. What I'll do is I'll make sure that I put all of your all the information in regards to contacting you into my brief. Emma, thank you so much for being a part of Marie's Memoirs today. I've learned so much, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure just to share. So thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Bye.